Hey, and welcome back to Recap Stories. Today we're looking at the horror film, It Comes at Night. I hope you enjoy the video and spoilers ahead. The film starts and we see an old man named Bud, clearly infected with some kind of virus. His daughter Sarah, along with her husband Paul and son Travis, are wearing respirators as they do not want to become infected. She says she's sorry and tells him she loves him. Paul and Travis wheel Bud down into the forest. They lay him down on a tarp and Paul apologizes as he places a pillow over his head and shoots him. They roll his body into an open grave and light him on fire, hoping to destroy whatever is infecting him. They're at the table having dinner and no one appears to be all that hungry as they're still mourning the loss of their grandfather. Paul and Sarah are in bed and Sarah says it should have been her out there, not her son. He didn't need to see that. Travis is upstairs listening through the floor. He grabs a lantern and heads downstairs. Kissing his dog Stanley goodnight, he heads to bed where he stares at a picture of his grandfather and himself. We slowly creep up on an ominous-looking red door. It opens and we see Travis with his lantern. His grandfather is hunched over on the bed. Suddenly, he starts to scream and Travis is awakened by his mother who says, "Wake up, there's someone in the house." The family is at the door, gas masks on and guns ready for whoever is there. Loud noises are heard coming from behind the red door. Stanley barks, but Sarah closes his mouth to keep him quiet. The door bursts open and Paul fires his weapon. He runs in the room and finds a man named Will holding a shotgun and wearing a bandana over his face. He asks Will if he's sick, telling him to open his eyes. Paul hits him with the butt of his rifle. Travis and Sarah watch Will, guns trained on him, while Paul goes outside searching for others. Paul returns saying he believes it was just him. Will is brought outside. Paul and Travis tie him to a tree and place tape over his mouth. He's alone in the woods, screaming with a bag over his head. The next morning, Paul is outside and tells Will to get up on his feet. Paul removes the tape from the man's mouth and wants to know why he broke into his house. He thought the house was abandoned and was just looking for supplies for his family. Paul asks him if he's seen anything, if he knows what's going on out there. Will hasn't seen a thing and doesn't know what's going on. He offers to trade food for some of Paul's water. He says he has 2 goats and some chickens. Paul agrees and gives him some of the water as he's dehydrated. Sarah tells Paul they should bring his family here. They would have more people to defend the property and wouldn't have to trade for food. Paul isn't bringing anyone over unless he knows for sure they aren't sick. It took a day for the grandfather to show signs of infection, so Paul is going to stay with the other family for 3 days to make sure they aren't. Untying Will, he says he'll help him, but if he's lying, he's a dead man. Paul is driving and suddenly a shot is fired. The truck loses control and crashes into a tree. Another shot nearly hits Paul. He grabs his rifle and leaves the truck. He sees a man coming towards and shoots, hitting him in the leg. He fires again, killing the man. Will is punching another man and Paul finishes him off with the rifle. Paul gives Will a mask and gloves along with water to wash his hands as they're going to have to dispose of the bodies. Will changes the tire while Paul places the bodies in a hole where a tree has fallen over. Paul returns home with Will's wife Kim and son Andrew. He lays down some of the house rules. The red door is the only way in and out and must be locked at all times, and all weapons must be stored in a safe. The families are starting to come together, chopping wood, boarding the house. Travis even grabs some crayons for Andrew to color with. Travis is dreaming that Kim is in his room. She climbs on top of him, kissing him, and starts bleeding from her mouth. He heads downstairs and finds her in the kitchen, scaring her in the process. He kind of flirts with her a bit, but ultimately he heads back to bed. The men are chopping wood and Paul tells Travis, even though they seem like good people, you cannot trust anyone. Stanley starts to bark, alerted by something in the woods. The men draw their guns and head towards whatever it could be. Stanley bites Paul and runs off into the forest. Travis chases off after him, calling his name. The barking gets louder and more intense until it just suddenly stops. Paul arrives and yells at his son for taking off like he did. Travis says he heard something, but the men don't see anything. Paul says Stanley knows the woods and will return home. That night, Paul enters Travis's room and tells him not to worry. First thing in the morning, they're going to head out and find Stanley. The men are in Bud's room enjoying some of his booze, talking about what they did before this whole thing started. Will worked construction and Paul was a teacher. Paul catches Will slip up on a little lie claiming he was an only child, when earlier he said he had a brother. He's starting to catch weird vibes from him. Travis wakes up again during the night and wanders the house. He finds Andrew on the floor out of his bed and brings him back to his parents. Travis starts hearing noises coming from the red door. He's calling his father but doesn't get any response. A loud crash scares him and he runs off to wake his father. He tells him someone is in the house. Paul and Will head in and they find Stanley in really bad shape. Paul tells Travis and Sarah Stanley is sick and they'll talk in the living room after they handle it. Travis wants to see his dog, but Paul can't let that happen. We see the families in the living room and hear a gunshot. Sarah grabs her son's hand as he begins to break down. Travis is there to watch as Stanley is lit aflame and put to rest. The families begin to argue as Travis tells them Andrew could have possibly opened the door and let Stanley in as he had found him sleepwalking. Will believes Travis opened the door. Paul says it's best if the two families stay separated for the day, just in case one of them is infected. Paul asks his son if he touched the door and he says no. He did, however, touch Andrew when he brought him back to his room. Travis is dreaming again. He's walking outside and we hear Stanley barking. He picks up a gun looking for the dog. Stanley is getting louder and louder, and Travis wakes up frightened. He vomits this black sludge and has pustules all over his arms. His grandfather is staring at him and he's startled awake again, scratching at the pustules that aren't actually there. Travis leaves his room even though he's supposed to stay. He's listening to the other family through the walls. He comes back and tells his parents he heard Andrew crying and they were saying they needed to leave. Travis thinks Andrew is sick. His parents tell him if they want to leave, they're going to take their food and water. People do extreme things when completely desperate. Travis tells his parents if those people are sick, then he is too. Paul asks Will to open the door, but he's hesitant, saying everything is okay. Paul tells him to be reasonable, he just wants to make sure everything is alright. Will opens it, putting a gun to Paul's chest and telling him to take his hand off his gun. Paul heads in and shuts the door behind him. Will tells him to take his mask off. No one is sick in here. He just wants enough food and water for his family, and they'll leave. Will has a gun to Paul's back and they leave the room. Sarah comes out of the dark and tells Will to hand the gun to Paul. Will says he just wants what's fair and they'll both lower their guns on the count of 3. Paul attacks Will, grabbing his gun. Sarah chases after Kim and corners her in the main entry. Travis is in his room listening and becomes more and more agitated. Paul opens the door, striking Will, telling him, "Let's go." They're outside and Will attacks Paul, knocking him to the ground and firing his gun off. Travis is rushing out of his room, hearing a gunshot. Will is hitting Paul over and over until Sarah suddenly shoots him in the back. Kim takes off running with Andrew and Paul tells her to stop. She doesn't stop, so he shoots her and she falls to the ground screaming. Travis arrives and it's just pure chaos. Paul killed Andrew with his shot. She tells him to kill her as she can't go on anymore, and he shoots her. Everyone is completely devastated at what just transpired. Travis runs to the bathroom and starts dry heaving in the sink. We see him in bed with pustules all over his face. He's infected. His mother comforts him as he drifts off, dreaming about searching for his dog. His parents sit and stare at one another, feeling the loss and grief for their son, and the film comes to an end. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you'd like more, please subscribe and turn on the bell to be notified of the next upload. Thank you for watching, and as always, do take care.